Welcome to DIA Today, Democracy in America Today. I'm Matt Parks alongside David Corbin. Glad to have you with us to explore the ideas behind today's headlines.
My left eye sees pollution. Those dirty fuels are burning. The earth's whole climate's churning. Clean energy solution. My right eye scans the bill. Fossil fuels are cheap. Wind and solar too steep. Drill, baby, drill. Predefined, misaligned, polarized division. Shuttered mind, worse than blind. 2020.
Well, Dave, what did you do last week?
I did not respond to Elon's email. However, maybe I should have. Unlike 2 million others who I think have not responded yet, and as President Trump said, are on the bubble.
I know.
But
Are you still alive? Are you even there?
that's all he was asking, is whether or not I had a pulse. But
Right.
it's interesting that an email like that is received so negatively, as if like, how dare, right, someone from the president's office, even if he's not official, send me an email asking me what I'm doing. Tells you the difference between a lot of different professions and some of those professions within certain agencies of the government. What did you do last week, Matt? Do you have your 5 things that have proven your worth to your employer?
I'd have to work on that, but I hope so. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's interesting mindset when you think about, well, we don't really do accountability here. We we don't really do tasks and achievements and goals and that sort of thing. We just collect our checks and we just keep going, and administrations come and go, presidents come and go, energetic administrators come and go, and we just keep on keeping on.
Well, you wonder too, what is there to show for it, right? And you can always ignore the benefits of those things that are around you, and they're just commonplace, so that you forget that they're there. And there are certainly some good things that come, right, from the work that's done, some of the work that's done by the federal government in terms of national security, et cetera, things that we wouldn't even know about. But I
Right.
think for many Americans, they're asking at a point in American history where the national debt is 36.5 trillion. There are about 340 million of us, which works out to a debt of about $106,000 per
Wow.
person. What do I have for this $106,000 in debt? And when you're asking that question and your own personal income, the average American salary being about 58,000, you've got a credit card bill for the nation individually of 106,000.
Right.
And what do you have to show for it? And I think that's a question that's at the heart of a lot of the effort that's taking place here in the federal government. And I know we're going to get into DOGE here, but it really begs the question, why not take a look? Why not
Right.
audit? Why not see what's happening? That definitely is the way of my work. We work with a system called EOS, in which every quarter, Matt, we have to set up new rocks, 3 or 4 things that we want to get accomplished between week 1 and week 13 of that quarter. And every week we have a meeting. And how close are you to meeting that rock? Are you 5%? Are you 50%? Are you 75%? And if I'm at 10% and it's week 10 and I have 3 weeks left, I expect my boss to say, David, why are you at 10%? What happened
Right.
between
Yeah.
week 1 and week 10? So it's a great way of accountability. I think it produces a certain level of common vision and a shared standard for any kind of working group. I don't think it's that far outside the box, Matt, in this case.
And we do want to take a little deeper dive into Doge. And, one of the things I hoped we would be able to spend a lot of time on was great Doge puns. But unfortunately, it's a very serious thing, it turns out. So there's a few people on the right that are having a little bit of fun with it. My favorite Doge pun was a headline at National Review, "Who let the Doge out?" Which I don't know if you remember 25 years ago, but "Who Let the Dogs Out," of course, was the great anthem. I remember being at a Seattle Mariners game with my cousin and her husband, And all of a sudden, that started blasting. I'd never heard the song before, didn't know anything about it, but it had become a thing for them. And the whole stadium starts shouting, "Who let the dogs out?" And now, I just can't help laughing when I see that as a classic Doge headline. And it probably fits, probably better than other uses of Doge as dog, because there's something about Doge that seems to scare a lot of people.
It is. It's also a great verb. I definitely think it should be maybe 2025 word of the year. Like
Yeah.
you got doged, right? And
Yeah,
I
got
think,
Doged, right? Yeah,
right.
that's right. Yeah,
So
there's a lot
that's
of Doging, bulldoging going on out there.
exactly.
Well, we want to start with some little more high level questions about Doge. Think about some of the constitutional questions that have been raised and some of the political reaction to that. And they want to spend a little bit of time looking at the practical effects of Doge and thinking about how that's playing out. And maybe at the end, think about how that relates to what's happening in the Congress, because even while Doge is doing its thing, we have the House just yesterday passing its budget resolution, making a plan in essence for a 10-year budget. Of course, we know they do this every year, and the 10-year budgets aren't really worth the paper they're printed on, but the vision there is worth talking about and comparing that with the vision behind Doge. So let's jump into the constitutional questions. There's quite a bit of debate, and it's somewhat hysterical at times. So, you read about constitutional crises pretty regularly when you read the literature on Doge out there. You read about people worried about dictators and things of this sort. And one of the things that I found was interesting, looking over a week or two's worth of pieces on Doge and on this question, a piece by Alan Charles Raul, who has been around. He was in the Reagan administration, he was in the George H.W. Bush administration, and now runs an outfit called the Society for the Rule of Law. Not somebody you expect would be easily given to hysterics over a conservative approach to executive administration, but nevertheless, the piece is pretty hysterical, and really starts talking from the very beginning about constitutional crises. And it takes about 5 paragraphs to get to the point where he actually lays out where the crisis is found. And it turns out that it really has to do with this question of whether the executive branch can control funds and agencies to the point of being able to essentially eliminate them, which is really not an issue that's arisen just yet in the work of Doge, right? So this is one of those, if we project things out and we imagine the worst case scenario, constitutionally speaking, here's an issue that might arise. At this point, we're not there yet. And so the concern is one that could become an issue down the road. But at this stage, really, what we're seeing is a lot of accountability. We're seeing questions about, what are you doing? And is that money being well spent? But, we haven't abolished the Department of Education by executive fiat just yet.
Yeah, I think that paragraph you referenced, Matt, by Raul, where he writes, specifically, the Trump-Musk quest for government efficiency is led by, quote unquote, a department that Congress did not establish, by unelected operatives who exercise overwhelming authority without appointment under the Appointments Clause, who are not subject apparently to any checks and balances, who are not faithfully executing laws of Congress as appropriated and legislated, and who are in the process of eliminating whole agencies, programs, and millions of employees without any congressional authorization whatsoever. That's a long sentence, but you can take the beginning of that sentence, and he references a department that Congress did not establish by unelected operatives who exercise overwhelming authority. Now, if you were to take those words and apply them to the Leviathan, the administrative state that rules over this almost $7 trillion yearly budget, you could make the same argument against it. And you could make the suggestion, I think, that in many ways, the administrative state of the United States has become like a fourth branch of government.
Right.
And I think the question here with Doge is Doge operating within the executive branch of government, or is it unconstitutionally becoming a fifth branch of government, right, to reverse the excesses of a fourth branch of government, the administrative state?
Right.
It wouldn't be right to add a fifth branch of government that's not part of the Constitution. But I think a lot of people would claim, boy, we need to roll back this fourth branch of government that's been growing leaps and bounds over years to the point where we are heading toward bankruptcy as a country.
Yeah, and formally, DOGE is part of the executive branch under the oversight of the president. There's no question about that. It's not actually a department. It's, that word is in the name, Department of Government Efficiency, but it's not actually a cabinet level department. It's just an office that's part of a previously existing office. And so, in that sense, there's nothing irregular about that. I think Musk's power is certainly questionable. Somebody exercising the kind of authority that he's exercising would normally have to be approved by the Senate as a normal appointment clause type of official. So I think that's a fair critique. But the rest of it is kind of wait and see. We haven't seen millions of federal employees fired. That may be the vision, that may be the hope, but we're nothing like that at this point.
Yeah, I think the idea, the question mark that's there, is Elon Musk currently an officer of the United States government, right? It really is the question here. And I think the most problematic aspect of this, if he's an officer and he hasn't been vetted properly through the appointments clause, then, what do we have here? We have someone who may have too much power. I would say, however, on that point, we just had a Biden administration where we wonder, was he leading the country? Was he actually president of the United States?
Right.
And if he wasn't necessarily someone who had gone through that appointments clause, or was it a group of people who were kind of giving him instruction on how to go about his presidency? So I think it's really difficult to specify what person behind the scenes is the puppet master of some of these presidencies. And I think, to their credit, although they may need to get him appointed as an officer, it's been right out there in the public. Here's Elon, come meet my cabinet, et cetera. So it's not as if there's some shadow person in the background who no one knows what they're doing and why they're doing it.
No, that's a fair point. And I think one of the challenges that you face anytime the left wants to critique this kind of operation is say, well, look, you don't care about the Constitution. You don't care about the rule of law. You're not committed to clear lines of authority and accountability. That's just, you gave that up a long, long time ago. And so how serious are these critiques? Is this just opportunism? Is this just grab the nearest weapon at hand and then pound away until you're back in authority and then you forget about all that? So I would love to see people on the left begin to make arguments based upon a strict and historical reading of the Constitution. Let's do that. Let's agree that we're going to follow the original intent of the Constitution. Let's agree that we're going to go back and read the Federalist, and we're going to understand the theory of our government, and we'll use that plumb line to measure the actions of presidents left and right. You want to do that? Great. Let's start down that path. But we have no real reason to believe that any of these arguments are coming from that commitment, right? Rather, it's more like gamesmanship and a type of, again, easy cudgel available to use for the moment until the next opportunity arises to cast it all aside and do your own thing again.
Yeah, it's very typical of the day we live in. It just makes it easier to point to Elon because of all the eccentricities of his person and suggest that somehow he's the person who's ruling over Trump, et cetera. And there are methods, processes that are at the disposal of progressives and individuals who are center left to counter these actions. And you as you mentioned, could work through Congress, for example, to clarify policy on what the president can and cannot do with the appropriation of funds. We spoke in our last show about a great effort by Kane and Coons. Not great because it may be the right thing to do, but it's the way to do things in trying to draw back on the president's tariff authority. So there are means in every branch's disposal to counteract the ambition of another, and those are perfectly fine. But to play the blame game by simply targeting one person in made-for-TV politics, it's not the right way to go.
Yeah, I was interested to see the Wall Street Journal editorial board was pretty calm about it all. they're interesting. They've not had a lot positive to say about Trump overall, I would say, but nevertheless, they have at least a concern about the size and scope of government, and so they're kind of taking a wait and see position. They say, look, if he defies Supreme Court orders, then we'll have a problem. But until that kind of thing happens, then either what he's doing is strictly legal, it's just executive branch oversight, which he has the right to lead and to direct, or it's things that are of questionable legality, and the courts could work through that process, and we'll see where those things land. And then at that point, if you start to defy court orders and those court orders are reasonable and respectful of the Constitution, okay, then we've got a problem we got to talk about. Now we have our own view on the Supreme Court, right? Not the final word on anything, an important word, but not the final word. But nevertheless, yeah, we're not at a point of a constitutional crisis until we actually have a constitutional crisis. And ginning one up or imagining one's there just for the headlines is not helpful, whether this day or any day.
Yeah, agreed. I do think, right, that there probably will be a crisis if there is a challenge to a Supreme Court ruling. But as mentioned, right, the court's word is one set of words, but the word that we operate by are the words of the Constitution. And I
Right.
think at that point that would play out, and you'd have a very kind of clear battle of ambitions between the president and the court at that point if they went in that direction. And at the end of the day, you could have the will of the people kind of ruling over what happens in the future. Nothing gets done without public opinion, or so that's, I think, where we'd end up with on this. But right now, I mean, what is your sense, Matt, as to kind of where public opinion is on DOGE, et cetera? Have you seen polls that say the American people are in general are supportive of it? Doesn't mean that it's right, but where is the American people? Where are they right now?
Yeah, what I've seen is I would probably say tepid support. So, I mean, Trump's approval rating stuck around 50%, which is pretty good for him by historic numbers. And, when you ask questions about DOGE related items, at least at the abstract level, should the government be smaller? Do you want more accountability? There's a solid majority behind those kinds of things. Certainly some of the things that would happen or could happen would probably not be as popular. There's definitely an AstroTurf campaign going on, or there was over the last recess, where there was efforts to send in, MoveOn.org was sending people to various Republican town halls to stir up dissent and to get some headlines about how the people are up in arms about DOGE. I don't think that's evident in real life. We know those tactics. MoveOn.org's been around for 25 years, almost 30 years now, since the old Clinton days, impeachment trial and all that. So we know their tactics, and this is kind of the thing that they do. So I don't think there's any real outcry yet. I think there's probably a little bit of wait and see. And those that were supportive of President Trump are still with him. I don't know that this is exactly what everybody was hoping for as the first thing that Trump would do right out of the gates. If you think about, what were his voters most committed to, or what were the issues that most animated them, inflation, the border, I think those were one and two. Size of government was probably a little further down the list, right? So if we don't see some action on those first two issues, if the price of eggs keeps going up and, we still are still feeling the pinch of inflation, could his support soften? It wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, I would say, however, and I don't know if it was ever like labeled an issue that they would poll people on, but one of the biggest questions surrounding the 2024 election is not simply the size of the ruling class, but its indiscretions and how it
Yeah,
operates and
sure.
how it used lawfare, et cetera. So
Yeah.
in many ways, this is kind of an end around retaliation, right, to that ruling class and its minions. This actually would seem to be, to the degree, I don't know how much of the swamp's being drained, but a signal to the swamp, right, that we're going to make this front and center a public matter, right?
Right.
Draining you all for all the things that you've done. So
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Framed in those terms, I think that's something that there was definitely a strong public degree of support for. I think if it just comes down to we're cutting the National Park Service by 10%, that's not something everyone was bought into. And so
right,
some of those things we'll see where we start to feel the pinch.
exactly. So it is interesting, Matt, however, that we would expect that, as you've mentioned, there is a response from center left, politicos, progressives, et cetera, to try a kind of media angle on Doge, but
Right.
also that there'll be an effort to kind of go through the courts. And so, what's going
Mhm.
on that angle of this whole picture? How will the courts be employed to counter that energy behind Doge?
Yeah, well, I think the big story to follow right now is one that's been unfolding over the last couple of weeks. Actually, just news this morning. So there's a Biden appointed judge who has tried to stay the dismissal of Hampton Dellinger, who was the head of the Office of Special Counsel for basically this board that is supposed to guarantee merit-based appointments and promotions in the civil service. And so really, in some ways, someone who's right at the heart of the matter, right? And so dismissing this person was really, of course, a appropriate executive function. I would argue this is just an executive office holder, and the president has the right to want somebody else in that position. But this fighting back finds a Biden appointed judge who says, I need 2 weeks to sort through all this. This morning, she said she needed 3 more days yet. In the meantime, he's been working, not just saying, okay, well, I'll lay low for 2 weeks while this is all sorted out. He's been working to use some of the powers of this board in order to first save the jobs of 6 people that were fired the same time he was, and by extension, really raise questions about the possibility and propriety of what could be thousands, tens of thousands, or however many federal employees down the road who might be dismissed. And so the question really becomes, to what degree will this court effort prevent the president from being able to exercise appropriate authority over the branch that he's supposed to be the head of? And so, we'll see. This is just a, federal judge. So this is the lowest level of the federal court. There was a court of appeals that chose not to intervene. The Supreme Court chose not to intervene, thinking this was only 2 weeks and what damage could be done in 2 weeks. Well, we may find out. But there was at least two justices, Gorsuch and Thomas, who were interested in thinking about this more. That may increase in number if we see more efforts to use this power during this interregnum, if you will, in ways that would make it more difficult for the president to do his job as executive, right? So that it's no longer just a delay to allow a judge to mull an issue over. It's a delay that's allowing for the further institutionalization of opposition to the president's measures as head of the executive branch. So we'll see where this lands. This is something that's going to unfold. Saturday will be the next court appearance, and what follows from that, difficult to say.
So the empire is no longer paralyzed and is perhaps striking back through the courts. It's interesting. You wonder kind of what the long game
Right.
play here is, and I imagine at some point when the 2 weeks are up, if it continues or it's ruled a certain way, it'll make its way to the Supreme Court. And you can imagine, given that most of the members of the Supreme Court right now, the majority are strict constructionists, that they would look at this and view it as kind of an unconstitutional stay and reverse the lower court's decision. But I think that then lends itself to this counterattack by the left. See, these are all Trump's cronies. He
Right.
put them on the Supreme Court. They're doing what he says. This really is authoritarianism. And he controls a court because it bends around his will and whatever he wants. So once again, it's ambition counteracting ambition, but not in the constitutional way thought of by the founders, but the ambition of one group against another. kind of employing arguments for and against powers granted to different branches of government based upon what's good for them as a party or as a movement.
Right, exactly. So we'll see how that plays out, but I think that's going to be really the key avenue for the conflict, right? Will be what the courts do. And some of this will probably make it to the Supreme Court. As you're saying, that then becomes an opportunity for those on the left who want to discredit the Supreme Court and who want to, down the road, perhaps make the case for packing the Supreme Court, expanding the court, doing other things, changing the lifetime eligibility to serve, et cetera, et cetera. All those kinds of quote unquote reforms that have been proposed and discussed. There's no question that there's a certain element on the left that wants to discredit the Supreme Court to the point that they can regain control over it. And whether that's a majority position or not, it's certainly something that they wouldn't mind laying down a few markers toward. And so if the Supreme Court intervenes in ways that they can spin as merely fealty to Trump, well, then that's going to be part of a bigger case against the Supreme Court's integrity and against its independence. We'll see. But I do think that that's really where the action is likely to be over these next several months. And some of it will be legitimate cases where people are raising serious constitutional questions, and some of it will be games that are attempting to slow things down or just, flood the zone, right? If you have 50 court cases going at once, you gotta hit with one of them. And if you can do that, and then there's a slow process of appeal and people drag things out, you kill half a term. And then all of a sudden you're thinking about the next presidential election, and maybe support starts to soften a little bit for Trump. And right, I mean, this is got to be the mindset, right? You're trying to buy some time and see if something will turn up.
Well, when we were preparing to do the show, one of the things I always ask, what difference is it going to make anyway? So what difference will DOGE make? I mentioned earlier some numbers, right? That the current national debt is 36.5 trillion, which works out to a public per person debt of $106,000 for the 340 million Americans. 106,000 in debt for each of us, and our average salary is $58,000. Some other numbers here. The total GDP is $28 trillion. So that means that our debt now is about 130% of our total yearly GDP.
Yeah.
Our current yearly budgets are somewhere around 7 trillion, and we're running about 1.5 to 2 trillion in debt each year. So the claim that Elon makes is that the efforts of DOGE, right, could cut that debt, that yearly debt, from 2 trillion down to 1. So cut it in half, about 15% of the $7 trillion yearly governmental budget. As of yesterday, that number achieved is 65 billion, but whether or not 65 billion has been saved is another story.
Right.
But even so, Matt, when you take a look at the budget resolution that was just passed by Congress, what do those numbers tell you about where we're tending as a country in terms of adding to or subtracting from our national debt?
Yeah, it's very interesting because, even while all this is happening with DOGE, and as you said, on Monday, they announced $65 billion in total savings, and they haven't quite accounted for all that with specifics on the website, but they say that's coming soon, so we'll see. But yeah, I mean, there's no question that that's a very aggressive number to think about cutting $1 trillion. Meanwhile, House Budget Resolution yesterday said, well, we want to try to cut $2 trillion over 10 years. And so a total of 86 trillion will be spent, which is 2 trillion less than was projected. There will be some additional tax cuts. Really, it's maintaining the current tax cuts is what it amounts to. But basically $2 million net reduction in spending. And so a total of about 2%. Now, that, of course, in the past would lead to hysterics from those who say you're going to destroy everything good about America. Old people will literally be killed. Children will be poisoned. The water and the air will never be clean again, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we've seen all those ads. We know that playbook going back to the 90s and the contract with America and every conservative effort since to try to make even a small dent in the deficit or reduce federal spending. But here's the reality check, right? So we see this effort on the part of Doge to do what it can about the executive branch spending. But of course, it's not really executive branch spending. It's federal government spending. And who's going to have the ultimate say on that? It will be the Congress. And so whatever Doge can do in the short term, reducing the federal workforce and cutting out contracts and evaluating programs that aren't performing and recommending cuts and all those kinds of things, if the Congress will keep appropriating 7, 8, $9 trillion a year, that deficit will keep on growing, that debt will keep on growing, and the United States will become more and more in danger of the kind of debt crunch that we've seen other countries face when they get to that 125, 130, 150% of GDP as their federal debt.
And that's the argument that very few people are willing to make. How do we take a look at this 7 trillion? What would it look like to maybe grow the budget of the government 2% per year rather than 5, 7, 9% per year, and allow for the American economy, once recharged, to be able to bring that number down of the debt compared to GDP. So, and that's something that's very hard to do, but oftentimes, as we know, it's the hardest things that politicians never attempt because they're hard.
Right.
And the easiest things to do are the things that get the most attention at the time, whether it's doing something that draws a lot of bad attention or draws good attention on the part of another. I do think at the end of the day, and you had mentioned this earlier, if there is a way that this DOGE effort can showcase that the president does have a responsibility to execute his office in a way that administers things well and efficiently and entrepreneurially, and does so without creating a class of 3 million workers who do their job or perhaps don't do their job, but have no accountability. If it brings attention to that overall issue of how we function as a government, I think it's done something good. But the bigger picture question of the money and the debt and where we're going as a country, I don't think is spoken to by any of this attention that we're paying towards DOGE.
Yeah, you're right. And the reality is, President Trump on the campaign trail said we're not touching Medicare, we're not touching Medicaid, we're not touching Social Security. And if you're not going to touch those, then you're not really going to do anything about the debt. In the long run, those are the drivers of the debt, along with now interest payments, because we have such a massive debt. Interest rates have gone up. Interest payments are a massive, massive part of that budget. Even defense spending has fallen as a percentage of the overall budget because we've seen entitlements grow. We've seen the interest on the debt grow. And so there's really very little you can do in terms of long run deficit and debt without touching those entitlement programs. And that's just not something that President Trump has been willing to do. We know it opens you up for all kinds of attacks, and those attacks are ready to be rolled out the moment somebody whispers Social Security reform or Medicare or Medicaid reform. But until someone's serious about that, we're not going to be able to do anything serious about our debt.
Yeah, and oddly enough, as we move toward our crystal ball, really the story of federal government spending and results achieved by that spending very neatly parallels the improper spending of another organization, the New York Yankees. For those in our audience who are Yankees fans, you realize that you've won 27 World Series titles in total, yet you've only won 9 since 1960. A little bit of the same picture of the federal government in terms of winning things. And is it just one title, 2009, most
Only
recently?
one in the 21st century. Yeah.
So
Red Sox have 4.
A lot of spending, but in the 21st century, the Red Sox, who, of course, Matt and I are fans of the Red Sox, have won 4. So our crystal ball, it is February. It is Grapefruit League time.
Yeah.
Finished the Super Bowl. We were right in our Eagles prediction. However, we didn't think it was going to happen that easy. We didn't think it was going to be a terrible Super Bowl to watch.
It was like an 80s Super Bowl. Yeah.
Yeah. Saquon Barkley.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. But we had the prediction right anyway. But so we're now in February, not yet in fantasy baseball league draft terms, but all right, let's ask this question. Over under for the Yankees and the Red Sox. I think that I've seen a couple different win totals for the Yankees. One's 91.5 and another's 92.5. Let's say 92 wins. Yankees go over or under 92 for their wins for this year's season, Matt. What do you think?
I think they're going under. I really do. I'm pretty realistic about these kind of things. I don't always just have the rose-colored glasses, but I see a Bellinger,
There's some
Stanton.
Yankees hatred there, Matt. Come on. Yeah, that's
Well,
you don't have it, just a solid
yeah,
hate
well,
in your
there's
head.
definitely that, but there's I think I try to have the kind of rational analysis that goes along with that. But I see them bringing in old guys that are this close to breaking down, and in the past, that's where they've had trouble. Right? When they bring in guys who are a couple years past their prime, they pay them big money, they're big names. They don't want to sit them either because those players' egos or their own pride, and so they keep rolling them out there, and these guys are just not going to produce. So I mean, if Judge pulls a hammy, right, or Judge makes a diving catch out there and tweaks his shoulder or whatever, they're in serious trouble. I think that lineup is not as deep as they would like it to be. The starting pitching is okay, but Garrett Cole is getting a little long in the tooth as well. So if everything falls together for them, they can easily win 100 games, no question about that. But on the other hand, they get a few bad breaks, which is I think more likely given their roster. They could be back in 85 wins. I'm going to say under.
Okay. Claiming that any Boston sports fan can be rational, I think is an outrageous claim. I mean, but you're kind of an adopted New Englander, so you
Yeah,
have some
that's right.
Quaker blood in you that might produce a little bit of rationality or
Yeah.
lack of hatred toward the other. Okay, I'm going to say over. I just think that that total's a little too low, and I think I say they win probably 94 games. I don't think they're going to win 100. I think you're right in terms of all these old players they brought in. How about the Red Sox? 86.5 is their over under, which is what, five and a half games over where they were last year.
Yeah.
Over under for the Red Sox.
Well, my head says that's about right. I think 84, 85, 86 is probably about where they land. If they can catch a few breaks, if they stay healthier than normal, then yeah, 88, 89, 90, yeah, that's possible. But I would say if I were just saying we'll run this season 1,000 times, my guess is they end up around 84, 85 as the typical season.
I'm going to say, Matt, that the Red Sox go over 84 wins. I'm going to give them 88 or 89. I think if one of their young players from their farm system has a breakout season mixed with some of the older veterans, I think Core is a great manager. They've got some deepness in their starting 5 or 6. So I don't think they win the AL East, but I think they make the playoffs. And I think they're going to be a tough out in the playoffs. I think in some of these, if they can get through that wild card game and put out 2 or 3 ace-like pitchers, yeah, they could go somewhere next year. But exciting nonetheless, and great to get back into baseball season and it's kind of daily rhythms. I know that is the way for you as well. Kind of
Yeah.
listening to the Red Sox as you kind of go through life as a pastime.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. We've watched a few games already, a little bit anyway, on the preseason, which it's a good taste. Certainly makes you long for spring to arrive when you see them out there. People in the outfield sitting there enjoying the game in their shorts and t-shirt. But yeah, I would be happy with a wild card berth and a little bit of postseason baseball. It's been a rough several years for the Red Sox, so that would be great. I've told you that our middle daughter has gotten into the Red Sox quite a bit, and she doesn't really remember, the great season of 2018. She was too little for that, so it'd be fun for her to have a season where she can really get into it and see them have some success.
It's the Red Sox or bust because it doesn't look like the Rockies are doing it for me out here in Colorado. Although the
Yeah.
tickets are sometimes $2 to get in the game. So
Okay, that's not bad. That's not bad. Yeah, well, that's going to wrap it up for this week's show. We thank you for joining us as always. We will plan to check back in with you in 3 more weeks around day 60 of the first 100 days. We'll see what the next 20 days brings. It's been fast and furious and a lot to think about, a lot to talk about. But if you want to reach out to us, feel free to do that using our email, democracyinamericatoday@gmail.com. And thank you again for joining us. We'll talk to you again soon.